Chilling Touch Midnight Guest. This is a story shared by Kun Fansri, an experience of her mother when she was a student and had to stay with villagers near a forest for her studies. However, she encountered something unexpected. The previous stories shared by Kun Fansri, The Night of the Freshman Welcoming and The Bed Haunting Ghost from Short Horror Stories 17 and 18, are not directly related, but if you haven't heard them, you can go back and listen. This is the story Kun Fansri told admin. Hello friends and everyone at Chilling Touch. Today I will share my mother's experience again, after sharing 2 stories previously. This event really happened to my mother when she was a student of the Faculty of Forestry. My mother had the opportunity to travel and stay with villagers to study trees in the forest. During the day, if my mother's group didn't have class with the professor, my mother and her friends would help the villagers in the forest. Sometimes they would collect forest products, or sometimes they would follow hunters into the forest. This is how they found strange trees and had many activities to do. In the evening, my mother's group would disperse and stay with the villagers living in that area. The house where my mother and another female friend stayed was a 2-story house belonging to an elderly couple, a grandfather and grandmother. The grandparents always slept on the lower floor because their knees hurt too much to climb the stairs. My mother and her friend therefore slept on the upper floor. After helping each other arrange their beds and hanging up their mosquito net by tying ropes to the 4 corners of the house, my mother and her friend went to sleep. Time passed until late, but my mother still couldn't sleep because she felt strange in the new place. She couldn't seem to drift off. When my mother turned to look at her friend sleeping next to her, she saw that her friend was fast asleep. My mother then looked around the room aimlessly and her gaze landed on one of the pillars of the house where she and her friend had tied the ropes for the mosquito net. My mother saw a dark shadow shaped like a very large person. The shadow looked like it was standing and facing my mother. At first, my mother was surprised. She didn't think anyone could enter the house and come up to the 2nd floor because earlier in the evening my mother and her friend had helped the grandfather, the owner of the house, close the door tightly. This made my mother think that the shadow she saw was unlikely to be a human body. However, my mother wasn't scared because she had a 6th sense and often saw spirits in various places. She tried to focus her gaze on the dark shadow and saw clearly that it was the figure of a man wearing a doctor's long-sleeved shirt. But what startled my mother, even though she was used to seeing ghosts, was that the figure had no head. The figure stood still facing my mother. It was quite a frightening sight. Seeing that the ghost showed no signs of trying to scare her, my mother softly said, "Let me sleep first, I will make merit for you later." As soon as my mother finished speaking, the figure slowly faded away before her eyes. It was very late then, so my mother fell asleep from exhaustion. The next day, my mother told the thrilling event of the previous night to the grandmother and her friends. The grandfather and grandmother were very surprised because they had never encountered anything unusual since living in that house. But upon hearing my mother's story, the grandfather and grandmother became worried and invited a village elder to perform a ceremony to dedicate merit and hold a large house blessing. My mother took the opportunity to make merit for the headless ghost as she had promised. The following night, my mother and her friend moved to sleep in another house belonging to someone in the village because even though she had made merit, her friend still didn't dare to sleep on the 2nd floor of the grandparents' house. That night, everything was normal. No ghost came to ask for merit again. My mother and her friend continued to stay in that house throughout the time her faculty was studying trees in the village. Friends, not long ago after I finished my exams and walked out of the examination room on the last day of the final exams of my third year, I saw my friend Take, whom I hadn't seen for many months, sitting on a marble bench in front of the building. He was sitting and looking towards the field as if he was thinking about something. Tyke and I used to see each other often in the first year during the welcoming activities for the Faculty of Communication Arts. After that, we drifted apart because we went into different majors. I majored in performing arts while Tyke majored in mass media design. We saw each other in some classes, but Tyke sometimes attended and sometimes didn't. So my opportunities to see Tyke became fewer. Today, seeing Tyke sitting alone, I walked over to greet him. But it was as if Tyke knew I was there. He turned towards me, smiled, and waved. When I reached the marble bench, I greeted him. "Hey, how are you? Haven't seen you in ages." Tyke smiled but didn't say anything. So I smiled back and sat down next to him. Tyke turned to me and spoke with a tired voice and eyes, saying, "I'm sorry for looking down on you all this time. Now I understand the suffering you went through." I was slightly surprised that Tyke suddenly brought up something that happened so long ago. "It's okay. It's just a small matter. I won't dwell on it and let it spoil my feelings," I replied. Tyke seemed relieved that I didn't hold a grudge and forgave him. He turned back to look at the field and spoke in a soft, slow voice like someone weak. "Life is strange. When you die without any warning, without a hint beforehand. Remember, no one knows when they will die, tomorrow or the day after. If you want to do something, do it quickly." I was surprised to hear this because Tyke never used to talk to me like this. I sat and listened to Tyke talk about karma and the value of life for quite a while longer until I don't remember what else he said. Tyke must have seen my puzzled expression as I listened and looked at him confusedly. He then asked me, "You want to know what's wrong with me, right?" I nodded in agreement. While waiting to hear what Tyke would say next, I heard the voice of my friend Jabe shouting from the front of the building, "Hey! What are you sitting here for?" I turned back and replied to Jabe, We just finished our exams, so we're sitting and talking a bit." When I turned back to Tyke, I gasped in surprise, "Huh? Where did he go?" The spot next to me was empty. I looked left and right trying to find Tyke. Shouldn't have been possible for Tyke to get up and leave that quickly. Jabe then said to me, "Hey, I've been seeing you sitting alone for a while now. I thought you were practicing your lines." I thought Tyke might have gotten up and left without me noticing, so I just mumbled to Jeb, just practicing a bit. It's an advantage of my major, performing arts, that practicing lines alone isn't considered strange. After that, I talked with Jub for a while longer and then went back to my room. The next morning, I heard the news that Tyke had passed away in his hotel room near Khao Yai. He had been dead for 4 to 5 days. When someone found Tyke's body, the room was locked from the inside. There were no signs of struggle or physical assault. The authorities were investigating the mysterious cause of death. I was shocked by the news of Tyke's death. If he had been dead for 4 to 5 days, then who was the person I was talking to for so long yesterday? I started to get goosebumps immediately and understood what Tyke said yesterday about life being strange, that you die without any warning or hint. That must have been Tyke's spirit coming to tell me to live my life to the fullest. A chilling touch, the voice calling out, "Go for a drink." On September 30th, 2016, around 1 a.m., Pat, who was sleeping comfortably, was startled awake. He heard a man's voice calling loudly near his ear. "Pat, let's go for a drink." Pat looked around the room but didn't see the source of the voice, so he thought he must have imagined it and went back to sleep. An hour later, Pat's older sister called and told him that Whit, Pat's relative, was in the hospital. When Pat asked what was wrong with Whit, his sister stammered as if it was difficult to tell him, and said to ask Kang, another relative, instead. After hanging up with his sister, Pat woke up Pang and told him that Whit was in the hospital. Then he called Kang to inquire about Whit's condition, and learned that Whit had drunk until he lost consciousness. He was in critical condition at the hospital. His relatives were all worried. Pat then told Kang that he would go visit Whit at the hospital tomorrow. After hanging up, Kang sent Pat a picture of Whit. It was a picture of Whit lying there with a ventilator. The area around Whit's abdomen was starting to turn red. Pat felt heartbroken when he saw it because Whit was a good-natured person, kind and always willing to help others, although he did have a habit of drinking alcohol and beer regularly, almost every day. When Pat thought back to the voice calling him around 1 a.m., which sounded familiar, it was similar to Whit's voice inviting him to go for a drink. Pang saw Pat's worried expression and reassured him that Whit would probably be okay. He told Pat to calm down and get some rest. Tomorrow they would go visit Whit early. The next morning, when Pat and Pang arrived at the hospital, they saw some of Pat's relatives standing near the patient's room. Everyone looked worried. Some had tear stains from sadness. Pat and Pang paid their respects to the elderly relatives and asked to go into the patient's room. When Pat and Pang went in, they saw Whit lying there unconscious with tubes and wires all over his body. Pang reached out and touched Whit's hand, but quickly pulled back in shock because Whit's hand was very cold. Pat and Pang looked at Whit for a while, then walked out of the room and talked to Whit's father. He said that last night he dreamed of Whit's mother, who had passed away the month before. She was holding Whit's hand and about to walk into the water. The uncle asked her why she was leading his son into the water, but Whit's mother didn't reply. Then the uncle woke up. Now the uncle could only pray that Whit would be okay. After Whit's father finished speaking, other relatives started crying again. The atmosphere at the hospital was filled with sadness. Then Pat and Pang met Kang, who was just walking in, and asked him what had caused Whit's condition to be so severe. Kang said that last night while they were drinking, one person challenged Whit, saying that if Whit finished the bottle of rice whiskey in front of him, that person would buy him another case of alcohol. Whit accepted the challenge. He kept drinking until midnight, when he started vomiting and then collapsed. After a while, he began to writhe as if he couldn't breathe. My friend and I helped take Whit to the hospital. While driving, we heard dogs howling all the way. I'm still scared. Pang listened and realized that the time was close to when Pat said he heard a voice, similar to Whit's voice, inviting him to go for a drink. This made Pang suspect that Whit's spirit might have left his body and gone to see Pat without him realizing it. After talking to Kang, Pat and Pang went downstairs to the cafeteria because they had left home early that morning and hadn't eaten anything yet. After buying some food, Pat and Pang walked back to the patient's room and saw Whit's older sister running and crying towards the emergency room. Pat and Pang ran after Whit's sister. When they asked why she was crying, Whit's sister said with a choked voice that Whit's heart had stopped and he was now in the emergency room. When the three of us reached the emergency room entrance, we saw Whit's relatives waiting anxiously. After a moment, the doctor came out and said that Whit had passed away peacefully. Cries and wails from the relatives immediately filled the air. Whit's father tried to hide his grief, putting his arm around Whit's older sister, who was sobbing uncontrollably, and comforting her. When everyone started to calm down, they discussed moving Whit's body from the hospital. After that, everyone dispersed and went home. The next morning, Pat and Pang went to the hospital to see Whit's body off. Pang saw the body lying there looking like someone sleeping peacefully. After closing the coffin, they loaded it onto a pickup truck belonging to Whit's father, who sat in the front. Whit's relatives followed the car back to his hometown, a distance of over 300 kilometers. Pat and other relatives of Whit also drove in several cars. As for Pang, he had to go to work and didn't travel with them. In the evening, Pat called Pang and told him a chilling story. When everyone arrived at the house in the province, they arranged sleeping places and slept together out of exhaustion. After a while, one of the female relatives woke up with a start and cried. She said she dreamed of Whit standing in front of the house asking for sandals because his feet were wounded from running after the car. When everyone heard that, they quickly opened the coffin and saw that Whit's body wasn't wearing sandals. This made many people too scared to sleep in the house, and they had to find other places to stay. As the day of Whit's cremation approached, Pang took a bus to travel to Whit's house. When he arrived, he had Pat pick him up at the platform. By the time they reached Whit's house, it was past 2 a.m. Even though Pang was very tired, he wasn't sleepy, so he helped Whit's relatives prepare for taking Whit's body to the temple for the cremation ceremony in the morning. When it was time for the cremation, the sala was full of guests who came to attend. The atmosphere was full of sadness. After the ceremony, Pat and Pang returned to Whit's house to stay for another night before returning to Bangkok the next morning. That evening, friends and relatives invited Pat and Pang to sit and eat and drink alcohol under the tree in front of the house. Around midnight, one of the relatives said, "If Whit were still here, he would be sitting here drinking too." Suddenly, Pang felt like someone was watching him from the tree. He looked up and was so startled that he quickly looked back down. Pat saw that Pang's face was pale and asked what was wrong. Pang replied that he saw Whit hanging upside down from the tree. Everyone at the table froze, their faces filled with shock. Pat slowly looked up and then looked back down, telling Pang that he didn't see anything. "Is there anyone else who sees anything?" After a moment, a young man shouted, "I don't see P ghost." Everyone scattered, running into the house. The elderly relatives inside the house asked what was wrong. So we told them the story. When the elderly relatives heard, they told everyone to pray and said there was probably nothing there. After praying, everyone dispersed and went to bed. The next morning, Pat and Pang traveled back. Along the way, they talked and concluded that Whit must have seen them drinking and just wanted to join them. A chilling touch, the hungry spirit. "Teacher, I don't think I can continue studying here anymore." The haunting words hung in the humid classroom air. Teacher Wanwisa turned toward the voice, her eyes falling upon a young girl, around 13, with a delicate frame, slender pale arms, short hair, and bangs framing her face. Despite her circumstances, she was undeniably pretty. This was Mariam, a 6th grade student in Teacher Wanwisa's class. Mariam's father had died from a terrible disease about 10 years ago, followed shortly by her mother. Her maternal grandmother had taken her in, and the two now lived together, the grandmother already 70 years old. Their situation was difficult. The elderly woman had little strength for work, surviving by gathering vegetables, catching crabs and fish to sell around the village. Miriam, after school, would take whatever small job she could find. The money they earned was barely enough to sustain them day to day. They lived in a house at the edge of the village that belonged to Taman, who allowed them to stay rent-free out of compassion for their situation. Now Miriam stood before her teacher, face streaked with tears, rushing into Wanwisa's arms. The teacher was startled by this sudden emotion and asked what had happened. Miriam explained that earlier that morning villagers led by the headman had surrounded their house. Nearly everyone carried weapons, knives, swords, three-pronged sticks, whatever they could find. They encircled the house, shouting for Grandma Pook to come down. Miriam had been sleeping but awoke to the commotion and peered through the window to see the large crowd. Terrified, she watched as her grandmother, who suffered from severe knee pain, struggled to sit up on her sleeping mat. Grandma Pook had been ill and hadn't gone out to sell vegetables for several days. Seeing her grandmother's condition, Miriam went to the window and shouted, asking why they were calling for her grandmother. The village headman Thongdi explained that 2 days prior, Ta Song had informed him that his wife, Grandma Sai, was possessed by a Pob ghost. Ta Song had brought in a medium to perform an exorcism. During the ritual, the Pob ghost thrashed about and eventually spoke in an old woman's voice, claiming it would leave Grandma Sai's body. When the medium asked its name to complete the banishing spell, the ghost said its name was Grandma Pook. After the exorcism, Grandma Sai's illness disappeared almost immediately. She could stand and walk normally again, her strength returning as if she'd never been sick. Ta Song became convinced that Grandma Pook's spirit had possessed his wife. He spread this story throughout the village and to the headman. The villagers, fearing the Pob ghost might possess others, had gathered that morning to drive Grandma Pook from the village. As the headman finished speaking, the villagers chanted together, "Drive it out, drive it out. We can't live in the same village with it." The men with weapons pushed their way up the stairs to Grandma Pook's bedroom. Miriam tried to stop them, crying out that her grandmother wasn't a Pob ghost. "She slept in her room all night, I can vouch for her." But the men wouldn't listen. They forced their way into the house and seized the old woman. Seeing the dangerous situation, Miriam ran through the crowd to seek help, thinking first of teacher Wanwisa. She ran straight to the school, tears streaming down her face, believing that she and her grandmother would be driven away, preventing her from continuing her education. Teacher Wanwisa was astonished. She hadn't expected people to still believe in Pob ghosts in modern times. But when faced with a mob mentality that refused to listen to reason, she knew the situation could escalate dangerously. She quickly went to invite the abbot from the temple near the school to help mediate with the angry villagers. When the abbot, teacher Wanwisa, and Miriam arrived at Grandma Pook's house, they found many villagers standing in the yard. Miriam saw her grandmother kneeling on the ground, her hands bound behind her back. She cried out in distress, pitying her ailing grandmother being tortured this way. Some villagers called for the old woman's banishment. Others suggested burning her alive. Teacher Wanwisa looked at Grandma Pook with sympathy. The old woman was thin, with her gray hair tied in a bun. The abbot turned to Headman Thongdi and asked what had happened. Thongdi explained that villagers had informed him Grandma Pook was a Pob ghost, so they had captured her, fearing she would harm others in the village. The abbot asked if anyone had actually seen her transform into a Pob ghost. Everyone fell silent, looking at one another. Ta Song hurriedly spoke up. My wife was possessed by a pob ghost that called itself Grandma Pook. And lately, Grandma Pook never comes out to talk with anyone or attend temple ceremonies. She's completely disappeared from village life. He added, when I looked into her eyes just now, I couldn't see any human spirit there. Miriam quickly explained that her grandmother hadn't been going out because she suffered from knee pain and couldn't walk easily. Her failing eyesight made her eyes appear dull, unlike those of healthy people. But the villagers ignored these explanations, continuing to chant, "Drive it out, drive it out." Among the crowd was Taman's wife, the owner of the house where Grandma Pook and Miriam lived. She declared, "I won't let you stay on my land anymore, get out." Her husband, standing beside her, remained silent. The abbot proposed a solution. Since none of us knows the truth about whether Grandma Pook is a pob ghost, I'll intervene. I'll let Grandma Pook and her granddaughter stay in the old monk's quarters at the back of the temple. There's an empty hut that's perfect. They can stay there until Miriam finishes school, and then we'll decide what to do next. The villagers looked at each other, seemingly agreeing with the abbot's suggestion. Ta Song, however, insisted, if that's the case, let's have the shaman perform an exorcism on Grandma Pook first. Only then will we feel safe. Teacher Wanwisa feared that if she opposed the ritual, the angry mob might harm the old woman. So she agreed, provided that the ceremony wouldn't endanger Grandma Pook's health. Let's do it quickly, she added. I feel sorry for her having to sit on the ground with her bad knees. The shaman performed the exorcism ritual. Throughout the process, Grandma Pook remained calm, sitting silently in the center of the yard until the ceremony concluded. Afterward, Headman Thongdi told the villagers to disperse. A few days later, Grandma Pook and Miriam moved into the hut behind the temple. The situation calmed down, and the school year eventually came to an end. Miriam graduated from 6th grade, and teacher Wanwisa submitted a transfer request to follow her husband to Uthai Thani province. Wanwisa continued to follow Miriam's progress. Later, she heard that Grandma Pook had passed away from old age. After completing 6th grade, Miriam didn't continue her education. Instead, she took whatever work she could find, earning very little and living in hardship. Teacher Wanwisa felt sorry for her and tried to help. Knowing a family that needed a nanny, she arranged for Miriam to live with them in Uthai Thani, in the same village where the teacher lived. This provided Miriam with lodging and wages from child-care duties. Wanwisa also suggested that Miriam enroll in non-formal education classes when she had time. Whenever the teacher was free, she would visit Miriam. Wanwisa was relieved that the pob ghost incident had finally ended, but she never imagined that Uthai Thani would have its own pob ghost experiences. Teacher Wanwisa knew a woman named An in her village. An lived with her mother, Grandma Fuan, who was nearly 80 years old. An had to work to support the family, sometimes traveling to other provinces for a day or two, leaving little time to care for her elderly mother, whose eyesight and hearing were failing and who had difficulty walking. Wanwisa would regularly visit An's house to check on Grandma Fuan's well-being. Recently, the old woman had fallen ill, unable to eat properly and lacking the strength to move. An had to feed her in bed. One day when Wanwisa visited, she noticed something different about Grandma Fuan. The old woman was unusually quiet, saying nothing and giving Wanwisa a hostile stare. Wanwisa wondered about this change, as previously, Grandma Fuan had been talkative and friendly. As Juanwisa was about to leave, An grabbed her arm asking to speak privately. She led Juanwisa outside the fence, and once they were far enough from Grandma Fuan, explained that neighbors had told her about strange occurrences. One night they had heard kitchen utensils falling. Thinking it was rats, they had gone to investigate, only to find a human shadow rummaging through food supplies in the darkness. Upon closer inspection, they saw Grandma Fuan searching through the cabinets, devouring raw meat and vegetables voraciously, an amount that seemed impossible for one person to consume. When satisfied, she walked away with normal strength. Unlike her daytime incapacity, blood smeared around her mouth from eating raw meat. Terrified by the sight, the neighbors hurriedly installed a kitchen door and secured it with a lock. When An heard this, she couldn't believe it, telling the neighbors they must be mistaken. How could her bedridden mother possibly get up and search for food like that? However, she began observing her mother's behavior. During the day, Grandma Fuan would lie motionless in bed, but at night she would rise from her bed and walk normally, searching for food in the kitchen. Teacher Juanwisa advised that if An was uncomfortable, she could bring in the shaman, but to ensure he didn't harm Grandma Fuan during any ritual. An agreed. Following evening, Juanwisa went to An's house, finding An and some villagers watching as a shaman examined Grandma Fuan. The shaman declared that the old woman's body had actually been dead for several days. What they were seeing was merely a vessel occupied by a Pob ghost spirit. He needed to perform an exorcism to drive out this spirit. He instructed An to find 2 chicken eggs of identical shape and weight. When she returned with them, the shaman lit incense and flowers as offerings to the Buddha, then began chanting mantras to expel the Pob ghost. He held the 2 eggs and rubbed them over Grandma Fuan's body up and down. Her body began to shake, the tremors growing stronger until the Pob ghost cried out, "I'm leaving, I'm leaving." Then Grandma Fuan collapsed. The shaman raised the 2 eggs, announcing that the Pob ghost had entered them. He told An to bury them in the middle of a field, at least 1 soi deep, where no one could dig them up. Teacher Juanwisa accompanied An to bury the eggs in the field. When they finished and returned to the house, they found the villagers in an uproar surrounding Grandma Fuan's body. An rushed to look and discovered her mother's corpse emitting a putrid stench, as if it had been dead for several days. The flesh was beginning to rot, filling the air with a nauseating odor. The truth was horrifying. Grandma Fuan had died days ago, but a Pob ghost had possessed her corpse to consume its internal organs. An was devastated by her mother's death under such circumstances. She took her mother's remains for proper religious ceremonies. Time passed and Miriam approached Teacher Juanwisa, saying she wanted to move to the home of a friend she'd met at the non-formal education center. This friend lived in another province, and her family needed someone to care for their elderly grandmother. "It's your decision," Juanwisa replied, "but take care of yourself. I'll visit when I can. Send me your new address." Miriam said she would leave that evening. Juanwisa offered to drive her to the bus station, but mentioned she needed to stop by An's house first, as An had urgent business to discuss. Miriam agreed to wait in the car. When they arrived at An's house, Juanwisa left Miriam in the car while she went inside to talk with An. An appeared distressed and explained her concern. The day they buried the 2 eggs containing the Pob ghost in the field, she feared they hadn't buried them deeply enough. If someone accidentally dug them up and the eggs broke, the Pob ghost might escape. She wanted Juanwisa to help her rebury the eggs somewhere else. Wanwisa agreed but said she needed to take Mariam to the bus station first. She left On's house and walked to her car, which was parked outside the fence, some distance from the house. When she reached the car, Mariam wasn't there. Wanwisa called out for her, but there was no response. She thought perhaps Mariam had gone to relieve herself somewhere nearby. Then she remembered that the buried eggs weren't far from where they were, and since she didn't really believe in spirits, she wasn't afraid. She decided to dig up the eggs herself, thinking that if she had them ready, they could rebury them tomorrow without wasting time. The sun was setting as Wanwisa walked toward the burial site. As she approached, she saw Mariam, her back turned, digging at the exact spot where the eggs were buried. Wanwisa stopped and hid behind a tree, watching with suspicion. How did Mariam know where the eggs were buried when she hadn't been there that day? After a moment, it seemed Mariam had found the eggs. She took a stick and smashed them in the hole, the cracking sound distinct in the quiet evening. Then she stood beside the hole. What Wanwisa witnessed next nearly made her scream. An old, pale hand slowly emerged from the hole. Mariam reached down to grasp it, preparing to pull whatever it was from the earth. Unable to bear the horrifying sight any longer, Wanwisa ran back to her car, trying to compose herself and make sense of what she had seen. Not long after, Mariam returned, apparently unaware that Wanwisa had witnessed her actions. She calmly got into the car and said she had gone to relieve herself. Wanwisa simply nodded and started driving, working hard to keep her trembling hands steady on the steering wheel. She was too terrified to speak. When they arrived at the bus station, Mariam raised her hand in farewell, thanking teacher Wanwisa for helping her all this time. From that day on, after Wanwisa dropped Mariam off, she never heard from the girl again. When she had the opportunity to ask at the non-formal education center, no one knew where Mariam had gone. All teacher Wanwisa could do was pray that someone would stop Mariam and the Pob ghost spirit she had freed before they could take more lives. A chilling touched by a Khmer curse at the Candle Festival. The summer heat was oppressive when we arrived at the festival grounds. We always came a day early to secure our vendor spot, but this time we didn't stay at a resort or hotel. My family decided to set up temporary shelter near our selling area. A daunting task, considering it was just us women. Fortunately, my boyfriend had leave from military service and came to help. After setting up our shelter, my mother and aunt prepared to shower at the communal bathrooms provided for vendors. With limited facilities and numerous sellers queuing up, I told them to go first. My boyfriend and I decided we'd shower after walking around the festival grounds. As we strolled through the game section, some stalls were already open for business. My boyfriend chose a shooting gallery where two men, likely the owners, stood inside. One appeared to be in his 30s while the other seemed about my age. As my boyfriend played, the younger man approached me. "Not playing?" he asked with a smile that somehow felt wrong, cold and unsettling. I politely declined. Instead of returning to manage the targets, he engaged me in conversation. When my boyfriend turned and noticed, he hurriedly paid and pulled me away, jealousy evident in his expression. "What was that about?" he hissed, his face stern. "I don't like you talking to that guy. Do you know him?" "No," I replied. "He just started talking and I was being polite." My boyfriend stared at me, his eyes seething with jealousy. Sensing the growing tension, I suggested we return to our shelter. The entire walk back, he maintained a stony silence, his face twisted with irritation. I found myself annoyed by his overreaction to such a trivial interaction. Back at our shelter, I gathered my toiletries for a shower. After finishing our personal affairs, we went to bed since it was already quite late. We needed rest for the next day's preparations. By morning, most stalls were operating and crowds were beginning to filter in, though the candle procession day hadn't yet arrived. My boyfriend had to return to his military base earlier than planned. After helping set up our stall, he said his goodbyes. "I need to leave now," he said. "If I wait until evening, I'll be late. Take care. Call me when you arrive home." I bid him farewell and called a taxi to take him to the bus station. Shortly after he left, my mother and aunt returned, but they weren't alone. The two men from the shooting gallery walked with them, carrying large bags of supplies. I gave them a puzzled look. "They helped carry our things," my aunt explained. "I know them. He's the son of my friend." That explained everything. "Thank you so much," my aunt said to them. "Are you heading back to your stall now?" "No rush, Auntie," one replied. "Is there anything else I can help with?" "Nothing more," she said. "Stay and have some food with us." After my aunt spoke, she turned to my mother and me, asking us to find food, while one of the men, the same one who had spoken to me at the shooting gallery the night before, accompanied us. He smiled at me with those same cold eyes. After purchasing our meal, we prepared dishes and utensils for everyone. Suddenly, the young man who'd been accompanying us walked away from our stall. The other man explained, "I brought some extra dishes and utensils from our stall." I thought nothing of it, assuming he was being considerate about using our things. I arranged the food we'd bought and placed a serving spoon beside the dishes. For privacy, I'll call the young man Ek from now on. When everything was ready and we were about to eat, Ek suddenly scooped some food onto my plate using his personal spoon, one that hadn't been used for communal serving. I didn't think much of it and thanked him. After the meal, the men excused themselves to prepare their stall, and my mother and I cleaned up the dishes. Time passed until evening came. The festival was filling with visitors, everything proceeding normally until around 11 p.m., when some vendors began closing. Our stall did the same. As I was packing up, I suddenly felt hot, dizzy, and had a strange pain in my stomach, an indescribable discomfort. My mother noticed my pale complexion and suggested I shower to feel better. I agreed and went to gather my things. As I walked toward the bathrooms, I began hearing voices next to my ear, both male and female voices speaking continuously. The words sounded like normal conversation, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. At first, I thought someone was walking behind me, also heading to the showers, but when I turned around, there was no one there. When I faced forward again, I jumped in fright, dropping my things. Ek stood right in front of me. "Sorry, didn't mean to startle you," he said, bending down to collect my dropped items. "It's fine," I replied, my voice trembling. "Going to shower?" he asked. "Yes, excuse me," I hurriedly answered, trying to walk past him. "It's dark ahead and there are some drunk people sitting around. Let me walk with you," he offered. The suggestion seemed reasonable, especially since I was beginning to feel frightened about everything. I looked at his face before walking alongside him. During our walk, he maintained light conversation, seemingly trying to create a pleasant atmosphere. I didn't respond much, feeling increasingly unwell. Finally, I had to tell him directly and stop. "Thank you for walking me this far, but you should go back now. I have a boyfriend. I don't feel comfortable with you approaching me like this." My words caused him to freeze momentarily before he smiled, that same disturbing smile that made my skin crawl. He just stood there grinning, making me increasingly uncomfortable. I turned and walked straight into the bathroom area where an elderly woman was collecting fees, which made me feel safer. As I prepared myself, I again heard people talking near my ear. I turned quickly but saw no one. I rushed through my shower and hurried back to our shelter. "How are you feeling? Any better?" my mother asked. "I'm dizzy and have stomach pain," I told her. My mother suggested it might be food poisoning and gave me medicine, telling me to rest. Time passed. When I checked my phone, it was already 3 a.m. I saw my boyfriend had called numerous times, but I hadn't heard the ringtone despite having the volume on. Perhaps I was too exhausted and unwell to notice. Since it was so late, I decided to call him back in the morning and went back to sleep. Just as I was drifting off, I felt an intense, sharp pain in my stomach. I called out for my mother. When she came, her face showed shock and she froze momentarily before regaining her composure. She sat beside me and said, "We need to see a doctor." She rushed me to the hospital where doctors examined me and administered IV fluids. Strangely, the tests showed nothing abnormal despite my continuing pain. They could only keep me for observation. By morning, my mother returned to the hospital, but my condition hadn't improved. The doctor could only prescribe pain medication and antacids. When we returned to our shelter, I took the medicine as directed, but it didn't help. I lay curled up on the floor, moaning in pain. The sensation was unlike anything I'd experienced before, like knives cutting through my stomach combined with a weight pressing down on my shoulders. I couldn't move, couldn't even sit up. The pain was excruciating. I noticed my phone showing incoming calls from my boyfriend and managed to answer. His voice sounded worried. "How are you? Your mother told me everything. Are you feeling any better?" I could only cry, unable to speak through the pain. When I tried to position the phone better to respond, the voice I heard wasn't my boyfriend's. Instead, I heard those same male and female voices, raspy and unintelligible. Then the phone connection died. In my agony, I didn't care about the phone or those strange voices. I just wanted the pain to stop. I closed my eyes trying to sleep, but X's face appeared in my mind. Inexplicably, I started to miss him, a bizarre feeling I couldn't understand or explain. I tried to dismiss these thoughts, attributing them to overthinking, but each time I attempted to sleep, his face would reappear. It became unbearable, this inexplicable longing coupled with physical pain. What's happening to me? I wondered. I forced myself to stand and walk to our stall. On my way, I encountered Ek, who approached me directly. "How are you? Not feeling well? Are you better now?" he asked. "Wait, how did you know I was sick?" I questioned suspiciously. "I ran into your mother on my way. I asked about you and she mentioned you weren't feeling well." His words conveyed concern, but his eyes and demeanor remained coldly calculating. "Where are you heading? Let me accompany you." "You don't look well," he offered. I stood silent for a moment before answering. "I'm going to find my mother and aunt at our stall." "Let me take you there," he said, and without waiting for my response, he took my hand and began leading me. Strangely, I didn't pull away. Instead, I felt an inexplicable comfort in his touch. When we reached the stall, my mother and aunt approached to check on me. Ek excused himself. "I'll head back now. I'll come see you again later." I looked at him, surprisingly reluctant to see him leave. My feelings confused me completely. Just then my phone rang, my boyfriend calling. Unlike previous times, I angrily hung up and turned off my phone. When he called my mother's phone, I snatched it from her, disconnected that call too, and turned it off as well. I told my mother not to answer any of his calls. In my heart at that moment, my boyfriend, call your boyfriend. I merely glared at her angrily without responding. She turned to discuss something with my mother. Though I couldn't hear their conversation, both looked extremely worried. Soon after, my mother approached me saying, "We're leaving this evening, but we're not going home. We'll go to Uncle's house in Udon first. Before we go, I want to see Ek again," I requested, which my mother permitted. However, when departure time came, my mother hurried me into the car and drove away from the festival grounds immediately. I howled and screamed Ek's name, sobbing uncontrollably. On the way to my uncle's house, I sat crying the entire time. I could feel it wasn't really me crying. Something was compelling me to cry, forcing me to long for Ek. By the time we arrived at my uncle's house, it was dark. My mother and aunt quickly exited the car and opened my door. When my uncle saw my face, he froze momentarily as if shocked by something before instructing us to enter the house and rest. That night I couldn't sleep. My body burned with fever and the stomach and shoulder pains persisted. My houses belonged to raspy-sounding men and women who seemed to be conversing or chanting. By morning there was a knock at our door. "You can come out now. It's over, nothing to worry about," came the voice. My mother opened the door and led me to a table outside. When my uncle's wife saw me, she was so startled she dropped the plate she was holding. Soon after, she brought another plate of food and sat beside me. "Where's your sister?" she asked. "Isn't she joining us for breakfast?" I looked at my mother before asking, "What sister?" "I don't have a sister. The one who arrived with you last night," she insisted. "I saw her standing next to you." "What did she look like?" my mother inquired. "About her height." She gestured toward me, but with shorter hair. "Very pale and petite." My mother explained, "Last night there were only 3 of us, me, her aunt and her. No one else came with us, and she doesn't have a younger sister, only an older brother." "But I saw her," my uncle's wife insisted, puzzled. "I thought maybe she left this morning." After breakfast, my uncle asked if I was still in pain. I nodded, saying, "It still hurts, but less than before. The sacred thread only eases the pain, it doesn't cure it," he explained. "Since you're here now, let's visit Pak Ka Chan Wei. Go pay respects to poor Pooh there." When we arrived at the sacred forest, my mother, aunt, and uncle walked ahead. I stood frozen at the entrance, feeling as though something was holding me back, preventing me from entering. My uncle and mother had to pull me forward. They took me to make offerings to poor Pooh. During the ceremony, an elderly man in white approached me with a serious expression. "Child, your eyes have no spirit left in them. What have you done?" he asked. I was startled. Normally I have brown eyes with golden flecks inherited from my mixed heritage, but during this period they had turned completely black, devoid of any light. "Stand up straight," the old man commanded. "Let the sunlight hit your body so I can see your shadow." I did as instructed. "Good. At least your head still casts a shadow," he remarked before turning to speak with my uncle. They appeared to be acquaintances. While they were consulting, I asked my mother what was happening and why the old man had made such strange comments. "When everything is resolved, I'll explain everything," she promised, which only increased my confusion. After my uncle and the old man finished their discussion, my uncle instructed us to return home to Nonthaburi immediately, rather than continuing to Surat Thani. The journey would take several hours. Along the way, we stopped at a gas station where my mother called my grandfather in Nonthaburi, asking him to wait for us. She also said something to my aunt that I couldn't hear. We arrived at my grandfather's house by evening. Before I stepped out of the car, I saw my grandfather and uncle waiting for us. When they saw me, they appeared shocked. My grandfather ushered us inside, but before entering, he covered my eyes with a cloth so I couldn't see. Once inside, he removed the blindfold. "Why did you have to cover my eyes?" I asked, puzzled. They didn't answer, merely exchanged glances before my grandfather raised his hand. "Don't ask questions now," he instructed. "Go shower, eat, and prepare for bed. While sleeping, no matter what sounds you hear or who calls your name, whether it sounds like your mother, me, or anyone else, do not open the door, do not respond, and do not look out the window until morning. Understand?" By now I was completely bewildered by everything happening, but I could only follow the adults' instructions. They prohibited me from contacting anyone. After preparing for bed, I felt pain in my stomach and lower back, though less intense than what I'd experienced at the festival. I remained fully conscious and aware of myself. Yet inexplicably, I couldn't stop thinking about Ek, longing to talk with him, though we hadn't exchanged contact information due to our hasty departure from the festival. As I sat contemplating, I heard what sounded like my aunt calling, "Sa, open the door for me, I'll come stay with you, open the door for me." I started to rise, then remembered my grandfather's warning that regardless of whose voice called, even my mother's or his, I must not open the door or leave the room under any circumstances. In my room was a Buddha statue with sacred thread encircling the space. The windows were sealed with yantra symbols drawn in white chalk paste. A bowl of holy water, incense, candles, and lotus flowers were placed before the Buddha image. I stepped back from the door and sat on the bed, curling up in fear. The calling continued but changed, alternating between male and female voices with raspy tones. Part of me wanted to peek outside, but I remembered my grandfather's warning and wondered what might happen if I disobeyed. Still, curiosity got the better of me. I peered through the window without opening it and saw a shadowy figure, dark, large, and male, standing in front of our house. The shadow swayed with the wind. As I watched, the shadow suddenly turned toward me, staring directly at my window. I jerked back in fright, tumbling onto the floor. I could only sit crying before the Buddha statue. That night I couldn't sleep at all. The shadow called to me throughout the night, trying every method to lure me from the room, mimicking my mother's or grandfather's voice. I focused on maintaining my composure through meditation, no matter how difficult it became. By dawn, my mother knocked at my door. Still afraid, I checked the time and the sunlight filtering through window cracks before feeling confident it was truly her. I opened the door to find her dressed entirely in white. "Go shower and get ready," she said. "Wear the clothes I've prepared for you. Hurry, we don't want to be late." I nodded and quickly readied myself. My mother then took me to a temple where we met my aunt and uncle, also dressed in white. There we encountered an abbot whom I'll refrain from naming. The abbot looked at me with a stern expression before saying, "Let's begin immediately. We're running out of time." Standing there confused, I had no idea what was happening to me. The abbot instructed my mother and aunt to seat me in front of an old wooden sermon hall, then ordered a temple boy to bring ceremonial items. When everything was prepared, he told me to clasp my hands in prayer and focus my mind. Then he began chanting something unfamiliar, not like any Buddhist chants I'd heard before. After a while, pain and cramping began in my stomach, spreading to my sternum. There was pressure at my neck and shoulders, as if something were pressing down or sitting on me. My body burned all over and I started crying. But the sound that emerged wasn't my voice. It was the raspy voices of men and women crying out through me. Suddenly I heard myself say, "If I can't have it, no one can." The voice was that of an elderly woman filled with hatred and menace. The abbot raised a thin cane and placed it on my shoulders as if preparing to strike. He tapped it lightly on my shoulders and head, but it felt as though someone were beating me with a large club. I screamed in agony. The abbot instructed my mother to give me holy water from the bowl he'd blessed. After drinking it, I immediately vomited, expelling tiny metallic pins the length of opened staples, numerous enough to be concerning. Among them were mysterious pieces of flesh that I couldn't identify. I continued vomiting for what seemed an eternity. During this ordeal, the temple attendants poured holy water over me repeatedly until I began feeling better, the pain subsiding and my body growing more comfortable. A temple assistant then directed me to shower and change into clean clothes before meeting the abbot in the main hall. After gathering myself, my mother helped me up to see him. I felt extremely weakened, as if I hadn't eaten for days. "What have you done to deserve this?" the abbot asked. I thought back but couldn't recall doing anything to anyone. My mother asked, "What happened to my daughter, Venerable One?" "It was Khmer black magic, a love spell meant to cause obsession," he explained. "But whoever performed it made it too powerful. If left untreated much longer, it could have been fatal. What goes in must come out. Think hard. What might have happened?" Hearing this, I recalled how Ek had used his personal spoon to serve me food despite the serving spoon I'd provided. Why would he use his own utensil? "Is everything expelled now, Venerable One?" my mother asked for confirmation. "Not quite. Its power is diminished after the holy water bath and drinking the blessed water. For the next 7 days and 7 nights, don't go anywhere. Don't eat food prepared by others, cook for yourself. Don't eat leftovers. Before eating anything from anyone, pass it under sacred thread first. Be extremely careful. At night, if anyone calls you, don't answer, don't respond, and don't go outside. When the prescribed time passes, it will be over. The curse will return to its owner. Thank you so much for helping my daughter." My mother gratefully thanked the abbot before we all took our leave. Back home, I turned on my phone and saw missed calls from my boyfriend. I called him back and explained everything. Fortunately, he understood. During those 7 days and 7 nights, I continued hearing voices calling me, but I strictly followed the abbot's instructions. When the prescribed period ended, we returned to the abbot. "It's gone now," he confirmed. "From now on, be more careful about what you eat or do, and make merit often. Build spiritual strength for yourself." He gave us all blessed water. This experience was a profound reality check for me. From being a non-believer, I now knew such things truly existed. The entire ordeal taught me many lessons. I especially want to caution all women to be extremely careful. Even if you don't believe in such things, don't take unnecessary risks. Never trust people too easily.